I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker today, Stephen Kropp. Stephen is the Executive Director of the Center for Responsible Forestry. Stephen has worked as a project coordinator, water resources engineer, forest hydrologist, and private consultant in the Pacific Northwest for over 20 years. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering at the University of Illinois and a master's degree in public administration at the University of Washington. As a graduate and postgraduate research assistant, he worked in cooperation with Columbia Basin Research and the University of Washington College of Forest Resources on a wide variety of research projects. While working for the Bureau of Land Management in Oregon, he developed an intense interest in plant taxonomy and community ecology. His passion for forest ecology and conservation began as a young child living near the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina and continues to fuel his desire to conserve our shared natural heritage. So welcome, Stephen. I'm so glad that you made your way from North Carolina to Washington. We're really glad to have you here in our Zoom meeting in Mason County. So welcome.
And could I ask if I have permission to record?
Yes, you do.
Great. Thank you, Stephen.
Well, thank you, Sherry.
Recording in progress.
And thanks to all of you for having me. It's great to be here, and I would not let Sherry down. She's one of our favorite board members. She's, as you all probably know, she's on the board of Center for Responsible Forestry. And we're all very, very happy to have her as a member of our board. So as Sherry said, I am the executive director of the Center for Responsible Forestry. I started this organization about 2 years ago. As a sort of to give you a little more background, I grew up in, for the most part, in St. Louis, although I did live in North Carolina for a brief period of time when I was younger. I spent most of my childhood in the suburbs, outskirts of St. Louis, and grew up in the 1980s during the height of the timber wars on federal land. And I was always interested in conservation and the outdoors. And I remember back in the 80s getting these newsletters in the mail from Earth First and Greenpeace and Sierra Club and other organizations with these god-awful pictures on the covers of clear cuts out in Washington and Oregon State, and these dire warnings about how we were losing all of our old growth forests because they were cutting them all down, and that we needed to do something to stop this. And as a teenager who was interested in forests and forest conservation, I thought, well, that's the place that I want to be, because that's obviously the front line of the battle to conserve our natural resources. As Sherry mentioned, I did live in North Carolina for some time too. My family had a house on the edge of the woods near Greensboro, where we lived until I was 6 or 7. And I think a part of what attracts me to the forest is this sort of yearning to reestablish that connection that I lost when we moved away, because there's not a lot of forests in St. Louis. And although we did go back and visit during the summers, my grandparents own a cabin in northern Georgia in the Smoky Mountains. I missed, it's surprising how much I remember from that house that we owned on the edge of the woods. and how much I missed it. And so I think that's maybe part of the reason why I'm attracted to the woods. Is that I've spent most of my life yearning to reestablish that connection that I lost as a young boy. So as soon as I graduated from college, I took the first Greyhound bus I could catch out to Seattle, thinking I was going to come out here and work to stop the clear cutting of the old growth forests on federal land, only to find out that the timber wars were pretty much had ended by the time I got here in 1992. Judge Dwyer had issued his injunction, which was the beginning of the end of clear cutting of old growth forests on federal forest land. I did go to work for the Bureau of Land Management as a forest hydrologist for 3 years down in Roseburg, but they did not, in the 3 years that I was there, they did not sell a single stick of timber. And this was the highest producing timber county in the Pacific Northwest for some time, Douglas County, North Umpqua River Basin down in southwestern Oregon. And they didn't sell any timber at all because of all the restrictions that were, the federal restrictions that were put in place as a result of the Northwest Forest planning process that resulted from this injunction on the federal U.S. Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management. So I left the BLM and I went to work in water resources for a while because my degree is in engineering, and my mother always told me that was the way you make a living. So I made use of my engineering degree, and I worked as a consultant for a while. I worked for the Wild Fish Conservancy for a number of years, designing stream fish habitat restoration projects. But then a couple of years ago, I started to look around for an excuse to get back out into the woods because I missed it. I missed working out in the woods. And I was back in Washington by that time, and I knew that DNR, the State Department of Natural Resources, managed an awful lot of land in Western Washington. I didn't really know anything about state forest lands. I'd spent a lot more time on federal forest lands. I really hadn't spent any time at all. I never set foot actually on state forest lands up until 2 years ago. So I knew nothing about how they were managed. I didn't know what was there. I didn't know if there was any old growth left. I kind of assumed that they were managed as industrial forest lands. I think that's what most people assume because that's what they're known for. There's a lot of recreation, a lot of, what they're known for is their recreational, as recreational destinations and as timber producing lands, I think primarily. But I thought because I knew that they managed so much land in Western Washington, I thought I'd just take a trip out and see what I could see what I could find. So I got on Google Earth. I got out my map of DNR lands of Washington State, and I got on Google Earth, and I kind of staked out what looked like a little patch of older trees in this sea of tree plantations and clear cuts in southwestern Washington that I identified on Google Earth. And I drove out. It was located just southwest of Oakville, so west of Olympia, going out toward Willapa Bay. And I decided to drive out to check out this little patch of what looked like older trees. And I'm going to try to start my slides. Can somebody enable my screen sharing. Great. While you're working on that, I I decided to head out and check out this little patch of what looked like older trees. So I drove out down Brooklyn Road, which is a road that heads sort of west from Oakville out toward Willapa Bay along the North River, and took a turn up into a tributary to the North River called Rainy Creek, up one of this logging road that winds up into the lands that are managed by DNR. And I found this little.
Could I interrupt you a minute? My screen says that I am screen sharing, but you're not able to get yours up.
It says it's disabled.
It's disabled.
Yeah.
Whoa. All right, all you experts here on Zoom, tell me what's what.
Nancy, this is Marty Gibbons.
Yeah.
Are you the host?
Yes.
So there's a little shield to the left of the participants down in your menu at the bottom of the Zoom screen.
My menu has disappeared.
Hover your cursor over the bottom of the Zoom screen. Did it reappear?
No.
What? Okay.
What happened is it came back to show me introducing new whiteboard, and it says copy the invitation, which it's that screen. So if I push start again, will I go back to that?
I'm not sure. It could be up. Okay, so you are sharing the screen. So go to the top of the screen now,
Okay.
and hover over where it might say there's a green bar.
There's a green bar. Yep.
So hover over that and see if your menu comes up there.
Okay. Yes, it did.
And so find that little shield. Do you see the shield?
Do you see it?
The security, it says security.
Oh, yes.
Okay, open that. And then you put a check mark by let all participants share.
Allow persons.
Or you can make Stephen a co-host is the other option.
Okay. It says that I am allowing participants to share, but it isn't doing that.
Yeah, I can't do it either. So there should be a check mark by allow participants to share. Do you see the check mark by that?
Yes.
And there is a check mark, huh?
Yes, there is a check mark.
Okay. And so somebody suggests stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
Yep. You'll have to stop sharing.
Okay, up here.
Yeah.
Yep.
So go to, now Stephen should be able to share.
Okay. Can ya?
He should be able to now.
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Miracles of modern technology.
Aha.
How's that look?
That looks good. And I even had my helper come in, so I'm gonna have to pay him, I'm sure.
That's
Okay, thanks.
how it works. All right. So I thought I'd bring this up so you can see where this little patch of forest is located. So I found this little patch of forest. It couldn't have been more than 10 acres in size. And I parked by the road and I wandered down into it. And I was just astonished with what I saw. It was just this beautiful little patch of older forest with these big old trees in it and a tremendous diversity of different species and sizes of trees. And I didn't get a whole lot of pictures of the stand, unfortunately, but a tremendous diversity of different wildflowers, mushrooms, different kinds of herbs and shrubs. Here we're looking at some deer fern, some oxalis, some golden chinkapin, some wild ginger, some rattlesnake plantain that I found, some wild bedstraw, baneberry. This is panicled bulrush, which is growing down by the creek. Some bleeding heart. This is Smilacina lily. I believe this is Angelica. Some Stacky's mint. So all of this growing just within that little 10-acre patch of older forest, some thimbleberry. And then these big old trees. This is a big, probably 100-year-old hemlock, I'm guessing, 80, 90, 100-year-old hemlock. It could be older than that. Hemlocks grow slowly. Often they start out in the understory, and they can be much older than their size would indicate, especially in these naturally regenerated stands. So this really piqued my curiosity when I wandered down into this stand. And it got me to wondering if there were other stands like this on state trust lands managed by DNR. So I requested all of the DNR's forest inventory data. I had worked for the BLM, so I assumed that DNR kept an inventory of all of their stands, their forest stands, and how old they were, which they did. And I requested that data. They sent it to me. So that gave me a map of all of their stands and an estimate of how old all of their stands were, with an emphasis on the word estimate, because that data is imperfect. But it helped me to identify and look for more of these older stands that I was curious about. Stepping back, this is a map of all public lands in Washington State. So the green, light green areas are national parks, national forests. The orange hatch areas are tribal reservations. The pink areas are military reservations. The little gray speckle areas are various county, city parks and land trusts. And then, but then all the bright red areas, those are all the lands managed by DNR. So the reason I put this slide up is to illustrate just how much land DNR owns or manages. They don't own it, it's owned by the state. It's publicly owned land, but DNR manages it on behalf of the public. The other thing to notice about this map is that DNR manages lands in parts of the state where there are virtually no other publicly managed, publicly owned forests. So especially down in southwestern Washington, virtually all of the publicly owned forest land is managed by DNR, and in many of the lowland watersheds surrounding Puget Sound as well. Much of the publicly owned forest land is managed by DNR. So through many months of trial and error, and looking at different data sets that DNR maintains, I discovered that the best way actually of identifying these these older forests that I was interested in finding is not by using DNR's forest inventory data, but which is very coarse scale data and full of inaccuracies, but by using this, what's called LiDAR data. And LiDAR data, without going into a lot of detail, is very fine scale data that's collected using an instrument that's attached to an airplane that's flown over the land and basically creates a 3D model of the topography. And this data that's collected by this instrument can be used to, amazingly, can be used to model virtually every single tree in 3 dimensions in the forest. And that's what this figure is showing. This is just a little patch of forest in the Upper Chehalis River Basin in southwestern Washington. I just show this as an example of an image that was created using this LiDAR data. And what this is it's a color-coded image of tree height. So the red areas are the taller trees, the green areas are the shorter trees, and then the areas that don't have a color, the white blank areas are the areas that have been, they're either gaps in the forest canopy or areas that have been recently clear cut. And so this is, and this data is available for virtually the entire state. So this is a very, very fine scale resolution, fine resolution data that we have for virtually the entire state. And tree heights are not necessarily well correlated with age. There's not a real good relationship between age and tree height, but there is some relation. And tree height is well correlated to structural complexity, which is a measure of, for many species, habitat suitability. And I'll get a little more into that later. So this is just another image of that same data, the LiDAR data. And this is the lower Columbia down here. But this is just showing the tallest trees. So these, rather than color coding all of the tree heights, these red dots are just the trees that are 120 feet tall or taller. And I show this image to illustrate that almost all of the remaining patches of big trees are on DNR. I've outlined the areas, the lands that are managed by DNR here with these bold black lines. So these are the DNR managed lands. And you can see that almost all of these, the big patches of bigger trees are on lands managed by DNR. And what we've done, the Center for Responsible Forestry has done, is we've been using this LiDAR data together with the forest inventory data to identify and map what we've come to call legacy forests. And legacy forests, as we define them, are forests that originated generally prior to World War II, are naturally regenerated, which means that they were not replanted. They were harvested and allowed to grow back on their own. So these are forests that were never sprayed with herbicides. And in many ways, because they were allowed to grow back on their own, resemble the forests that they replaced, and contain many legacies of the original forests, because the way in which forestry was practiced prior to World War II was much different than the way it was practiced after World War II. World War II kind of marked a turning point in the way in which forestry was practiced. Prior to World War II, there were no chainsaws, there were no pesticides or herbicides. So they were still using hand saws. Forestry is a very labor intensive endeavor, and they would often leave a lot behind when they would harvest the stand. A lot of the smaller trees would get left behind, and those would either grow back and become the next stand of larger trees, or sometimes they would burn them. But that would still leave some of the underground, below ground legacies behind of the original ecosystem. So that's why we refer to these as legacy forests. They retain the legacies of the original forest in that they were naturally regenerated. They weren't planted. They grew back. They were reseeded naturally. And they're also legacies of historic logging practices. You go out to these stands and you often see remnants of signs of the way in which they logged these stands in the past, right? So these big old stumps with the springboard notches in them. That's a really good sign that you're in an older legacy forest, because they didn't harvest stands that way after World War II. So what we've been doing is using a model that we've developed in GIS, is converting this LiDAR data to polygons using a spatial pattern recognition routine to simplify them. And then you can look at where DNR is planning timber sales to get some sense of which legacy forests are at risk. And so this is another thing I was curious about as I was beginning to learn about these legacy forests and where they were located, and how many of these older forests still existed in Western Washington and these lowland watersheds in these areas that were managed by DNR. Was where are they harvesting timber, and are these legacy forests, how many of them are at risk, how many are protected, and are they actually planning timber sales in any of these legacy forests? And to my surprise, to my dismay, it turns out that DNR is actively targeting many of these legacy forests for harvest. And you can see that in this figure. These gray polygons are all of the timber sales that DNR currently has planned in this part of southwestern Washington. And so they don't perfectly overlap the legacy forest, but as you can see, they're taking a lot of the older forest. They're planning to take an awful lot of the older forest over the next 5 to 10 years in this part of the lower Columbia Basin. So that's just an example. Moving up to Capital State Forest, we see much the same thing. Almost all of the remaining larger patches of big trees are on lands managed by DNR, which are the areas, again, within these dark black lines. And we've converted those to polygons to make them easier to see. And these are all the timber sales they have planned in Capital State Forest over the next 5 to 10 years. So many more timber sales planned up here than in the lower Columbia. And part of the reason for that is that there are certain protections for marble murrelet habitat down in the lower Columbia, because there are that part of the state does get a lot of use from marble murrelets. There aren't many murrelets that have been documented in the Upper Chehalis River Basin. So there's not nearly as much, virtually no protected murrelet habitat in South Central Washington and on the south end of Puget Sound. So they're, in this part of the state, they're going after almost all of the remaining older forests, or legacy forests, as we've come to call them. So after I realized that these legacy forests, these older forests, that they did exist on DNR, that there were these patches of older century-old forests that still exist in southwestern Western Washington, in these lowland watersheds surrounding Puget Sound, and that they are at risk, that DNR is actively targeting them for harvest. I decided to go out and explore some of these timber sales and document what I saw in an attempt to raise awareness. Well, first, because I was curious about the forests that they were planning to log. And of course, because I was interested in documenting them and sharing that information with others who might be concerned, as I was, about the logging of these forests. And one of the first timber sales that I went out to look at, I've got highlighted here, was the Chameleon timber sale, called the Chameleon timber sale, which some of you may have heard of. It was in the newspapers a couple of years ago. The Chameleon timber sale was in Capitol State Forest. And this is a timber sale that was proposed back in 2020, back when I was still just learning about all of this. And this is the Chameleon down here in the lower center part of the screen. And this is showing the LiDAR data, again, the color-coded version of the LiDAR data. And I show this slide to illustrate how big the trees were in this particular timber sale. As it turned out, the Chameleon timber sale had probably the highest density of big trees of any stand in Capitol State Forest. We've seen some other timber sales proposed since Chameleon. This is a close-up of the Chameleon, Unit 1 of Chameleon. We've had some other timber sales that have been proposed in Capitol State Forest since Chameleon, including Smuggler and Oracle, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, which are shown up here in the upper right-hand side of the screen. They have big trees in them too, but not as many as Chameleon did. So this was a special stand of trees. This stand down here that they had scheduled to harvest. So so I went out to visit this forest, and I was just blown away by what I saw. And this is the first timber sale that I really worked to try to stop. I mean, I did everything I could think of to try to raise awareness of this timber sale. I created videos that I posted on YouTube. I started a website just for this specific timber sale. I participated in the SEPA process. I submitted comments to DNR as part of the SEPA State Environmental Protection Act review process, which is a process that every timber sale is required to go through before they put it up for auction. I wrote multiple letters to DNR. I testified at Board of Natural Resources meetings. I sent photographs of this timber sale to DNR and to the Board of Natural Resources. I spoke to local neighborhood homeowners associations. I handed out flyers door to door. I literally did everything I could think of to generate opposition to this timber sale and try to stop it. But I was literally a lone voice in the wilderness at that point. I really didn't have any resources. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know these timber sales could be appealed in the county courts. And tragically, this timber sale I lost, and this timber sale was logged last year. This is what the forest looks like today. These videos were taken by Andy Zahn, who is a videographer who works with us, very talented videographer. He's created videos of a number of other timber sales, including Serenity Now and Green Thomas and Delica and several others. There's one of the logging trucks carrying away a truckload full of probably century-old trees. This was another timber sale that one of the first timber sales I went out to visit. Francis 40. This one was located in the Willapa River Basin, which, as you may imagine, gets gas drains to Willapa Bay. It's in the Mill Creek watershed, which is a tributary to the Willapa River. And this is again a map of the legacy forest that we mapped in the Willapa River watershed. This is Willapa Bay out here to the left. Not a lot of legacy forest left. This is true in most areas where DNR owns forest lands. Most of the, virtually all, if not all of the old growth has been cut. So all of the 99% to 100% of the forests have been cut at some point in the past. So there are no pristine per se forests left. These legacy forests are the closest thing we have to old growth, and there's not many of those left either. But we're lucky that we have what we have, and to have an opportunity to do something to save them. So this is pointing to that Francis 40 timber sale. And these forests out in the Mill Creek watershed are in the Sitka spruce zone. So what's one thing that's unique about these forests is they've got these legacy forests that you'll you find out there is they've got really big, a lot of them have these really big legacy Sitka spruce trees in them. I think this one's was over 4 feet in diameter. So some of the, probably the biggest Sitka spruce trees you'll see outside of the Olympic National Park. Just a gorgeous forest. Unfortunately, was clear cut last year as well. These are all of the timber sale, future timber sales they have planned in Mill Creek. So Francis 40 is now gone. It was just south of, this is Mill Creek right here. It was, I think it was right here. And I show this slide to illustrate that how they're targeting, just systematically targeting all of these legacy forests. The only patch of older trees that they're not targeting, that they don't have a timber sale planned in, is this little patch here, which has a known occupied murrelet nest in it. So they're not able to log this stand, at least for now, because of the occupied murrelet nest that's there. And another timber sale that's currently under review, under SEPA review, another timber sale in Mill Creek is this Bedford Sorts, which actually has 4 units. There's a couple units up here and another one down here. So this is one that we're currently fighting to stop. Another classic example of one of these naturally regenerated forests. Just a beautiful forest. Diversity, great diversity of different tree species. Cedar, hemlock, spruce, alder, maple. You walk through these forests and you'll find patches of huckleberry. You'll find sometimes you'll run across fields of bracken fern. You'll wander across patches of devil's club and vine maple. You might wander into a little wooded area that's carpeted with a dense carpet of wood sorrel. And the thing about these legacy forests is most species can find a niche somewhere in these forests because there's so much diversity. And they also are very resistant to disease and pest infestations for the same reason. The other thing about these forests is that these big trees tend to be fire resistant because the branches are so high off the ground. Some of these trees are over 200 feet tall. So just to give another example, heading up north now, this is North Hood Canal, Quilcene Bay. This is the Hood Canal Bridge here. This is Dabob Bay, Quilcene Bay and Dabob Bay. Dabob Bay Natural Area. Again, not a whole lot of older forests left here. Almost everything that is left is on DNR. And not a whole lot left on DNR either. But there are these little patches of legacy forests that remain. again, they're actively targeting most of these forests for harvest. One timber sale that is currently under review which is highlighted here in yellow, is the Pennywise timber sale. This is an extraordinarily beautiful forest. Lots of old growth legacy trees in this stand. Some of these trees are probably hundreds of years old. They have marked some of the oldest trees with blue paint, which means those trees will be set aside, but everything else around them is going to be clear cut. Just some more photos of Pennywise. The other thing you often see in these legacy forests is these standing dead trees that are pot marked with these holes. And these holes are created by different animals. A lot of them are created by woodpeckers or started by woodpeckers, and then they may be enlarged by small mammals and other creatures that use them as nest sites. But these standing dead trees create great habitat for all forms of wildlife. Dead trees, Elliot Norris, who wrote a seminal book, Ancient Forests of the Pacific Northwest, refers to dead and down trees as the life of the forest. Because there are so many organisms that are dependent on dead wood for habitat, surprisingly. A lot of this we didn't know just 20 or 30 years ago. It's another big standing dead snag in the Pennywise timber sale. There's a couple more of those big old growth legacy trees that have been marked as leave trees for attention. And these are all the other timber sales that they're planning in legacy forests in East Jefferson County, in and around Dabob and Quilcene Bay, and on the west side of Hood Canal. So this just illustrates how they're systematically targeting all of these older legacy forests for harvest. And this is happening all over Western Washington. This is not limited to Southwest Washington and Dabob Bay. This is a map of the Lower Snoqualmie watershed, which has been hammered by logging over the years. But there are just a few remaining patches of older forests on DNR. And this is showing a couple of those patches. And this is taking a bit of a different look at these older legacy forests. This map is based on their forest inventory data instead of the LiDAR. So this is showing a color-coded map based on the origin date. So the pink areas are areas that originated or were logged prior to 1930. So those are stands that are 90 years old or older. The green areas originated between 1931 and 1945, and then the other areas have been more recently logged since World War II. So not much of the older forests left. And unfortunately, they just picked off one of the last remaining largest blocks of older forests last year in what they call referred to as the Fontel timber sale. This is one I also worked very hard to stop, but unfortunately was unsuccessful. This particular forest was remarkable, again, in its the tremendous diversity of different plant communities in the understory, and diversity in the herb and shrub layers. So saw a lot of red elderberry in this stand, maidenhair fern, more wild ginger, water leaf, Smilacina lily, trillium, baneberry, bleeding heart. There's some vanilla leaf, some lily of the valley, and baby Smilacina coming up in the spring. And of course, lots of big trees and lots of diversity. Again, these one of the things that distinguishes these legacy forests, these natural forests, is they tend to be very patchy. So here you're seeing a patch of dense vine maple leading down into I think there's a creek down there. One more example of a timber sale that I fought hard to stop was the Pertinier timber sale. This one was in Tiger Mountain State Forest. So as many of you probably know, Tiger Mountain State Forest is located just east of Seattle, south of I-90. So this is the I-90, Highway 90 here, to the north of Tiger Mountain State Forest, which is highlighted, and it's a little hard to see, but by this dark black boundary. This is all land that's managed by DNR. There is a large protected block of land in Tiger Mountain State Forest, which is shown in green here. This is the Natural Resource Conservation Area. So that area is off limits to logging. So we're lucky that these legacy forests within that natural resource area, which are shown in red, are protected. So those forests will never be logged, or never be commercially logged. So they can't be clear cut. They can go in and thin them, but they can't be commercially logged. But again, the majority of legacy forests within Tiger Mountain State Forests are not protected. They haven't been logging them quite as aggressively as they have in some other parts of the state. But they did take a big chunk out of one of them last year, and that was the Pertinier timber sale. I was pretty excited when I went out to walk this timber sale to find this big old cedar snag. I do see a lot of older legacy snags in these forests, but not very many that are this big. This snag's probably 6-7 feet in diameter. And almost certainly hundreds of years old. And again, this forest, all of the classic characteristics of these naturally regenerated older forests, big legacy trees, which were probably a lot of these older hemlocks, probably understory trees at the time that this stand was last logged. These standing dead snags with these holes that are carved out of them. These big cedars, which were probably also understory trees at the time that the stand was last logged back in the early 1900s. Another tree with some big holes that have been carved out of it. How are we doing on time, Sherry? You got half an hour left?
Yes.
Okay. So I could give you many more examples, unfortunately, of forests that we've lost over the last 2 years since I've been tracking these timber sales. But I'm going to skip forward to the Smuggler timber sale and spend some time on this one, because the Smuggler timber sale is a sale that really kickstarted our organization into high gear. This timber sale represented a real turning point for us and for the movement to protect these legacy forests on DNR, state trust lands in general. Before Smuggler, I was pretty much the only one attending the Board of Natural Resources meetings who was speaking out against any of these timber sales. These timber sales, for the most part, were sailing through without really any public oversight or accountability, certainly without any media coverage or awareness. But Smuggler changed all of that. I learned about Smuggler toward the end of 2020. It was Smuggler Timber Sale is near the northeast corner of Capitol State Forest. I did not have the LiDAR data back then, so I did not, all I had was the DNR forest inventory data. So I didn't necessarily know, entirely know what we were dealing with in the Smuggler timber sale until I got out there to look at it. And I had trouble accessing this timber sale because it was behind, DNR had all the gates to the roads leading into this timber sale locked. And it was a long hike to get past the gates. And I tried to get access. I contacted DNR and requested access to this timber sale, and they would not let me in. So it took me a while to get in to see this forest. I basically had to wait for them to open the gates. This forest probably would have been clear cut if they hadn't have opened the gates for the auction, and if Bonnie Blessing, one of the local homeowners out there, hadn't called me to tell me that they had opened the gates for the prior to the auction, I probably never would have seen this forest, and no one would have ever known anything about Smuggler. But I got a call from Bonnie toward the end of November 2020, and I met Bonnie. She was one of the people she'd gotten one of my flyers that I handed out when I was trying to generate opposition to the Chameleon timber sale back about a year prior to that. And she knew I had an interest in this timber sale. And so she called me to let me know that they'd opened the gate. And I drove out, walked into this timber sale, and immediately I knew that this timber sale was different from every other timber sale that I'd seen on DNR, because it clearly had old growth in it. These trees were, this was not what we normally refer to as when we talk about a legacy forest. These trees were, some of these trees were close to 400 years old. You don't see forests like this on DNR anymore. And nobody knew that these old growth trees were there, apparently. Even DNR apparently didn't know that they had old growth in this timber sale. And they denied it when I called. I called as soon as I got back from the Smuggler. I called Andy Hayes, who was the director of the Forest Resources Division at DNR, who I was still on speaking terms with at that point. And I told him, I said, look, you've got old growth in this timber sale. You've got to cancel this timber sale. That's because DNR has policies that prohibit logging of old growth forests. And he referred me to Koshari Eagle, who's their product sales division manager. And she assured me that there was no old growth in this timber sale, that that this timber sale had been thoroughly vetted and assessed by all of their top foresters and biologists, and that they had done a thorough assessment and determined that there was no old growth, and that I could rest assured there was no old growth in this timber sale. But I knew better. Because I know old growth when I see it. I've been to the Olympic National Park. I've been to Mount Rainier National Park, and this is the kind of thing that you expect to see when you go out to the Olympic National Park, not when you go out and drive out to the West Olympia into Capitol State Forest. I continued to harass DNR over this timber sale for about a month. I sent them photographs, I sent them aerial photos, I sent them data, I sent them tree diameters, I sent them GPS data. I went back, there's some more photographs of some of the trees that I took. And some of these huge standing dead snags. I did get a hold of a stand assessment the DNR had conducted for this timber sale, in which they mapped this stand of what they referred to as maturation 1 and 2, which is shown in this green outline, which is a older category of trees, and it's a development stage that maturation 1 is, I think it's generally between 70 to 145 years old. But certainly not old growth. Maturation 2 is older than that. It can be old growth. But there are all kinds of problems with this map. It's based off this 1958 aerial photo. This is a terrible aerial photo. It's very misleading. Parts of this aerial photo are distorted, and you can't see large parts of this forest. You can't see, or there are large parts of this stand that you can't see clearly in this forest, in this photo. If you look at other older aerial photos, it's clear that this stand of older trees extends much further to the south. And so one of the things I did in the process of trying to convince DNR that this actually was old growth, that they actually did have old growth in this timber sale, is when I went out and GPSed the boundary of what I considered to be old growth, which is shown as in white here. So I calculated there were about 11 acres of old growth in this one unit. So the unit one boundary, which is in yellow, that's their cut boundary. That's the area they were planning to cut. And then I also found these patches of legacy trees, which are shown in pink, which were older trees, not necessarily old growth. And so I sent this to DNR, And after about a month of wrangling and back and forth and many email exchanges with their biologists and their old growth experts and with Andy and their timber sale administrator, finally, they agreed to go out and do a follow-up, more detailed assessment, old growth assessment of this stand. And lo and behold, they found that many of the trees in this area that I mapped as old growth are well over 140 years old. And that indeed there are some of these trees are up to 400 years old. So this is what still, even after all of that, DNR did not want to acknowledge that there was old growth, that this deserved protection under their old growth policy. So they were, despite all of this, despite finding these 140, 190, 212, 400-year-old trees, which are certainly old growth by any definition, they were still determined to move forward with this timber sale. They were willing to give us this little patch in pink. This was the one concession they were willing to make. They said, we'll give you this 1 2-acre patch in pink, but we're gonna cut everything else. And we said, that's not good enough. We're gonna go to the Seattle Times and tell them what we found. And I was fortunate that I'd met Samantha Kropp, no relation to me. Samantha Kropp was had been working at that time as the grassroots coordinator for Cascadia Wildlands, which is a nonprofit that's based out of Eugene, Oregon, and had contacted me because she saw one of the videos I posted on YouTube about Chameleon, and was interested in learning more about the work that I was doing up here. And I told her about Smuggler, and she happened to know Linda Mapes, who's an environmental reporter for the Seattle Times. And so Samantha put me in contact with Linda Mapes at the Times. And Linda, long story short, decided that this was worthy of a story, and it wound up on the front page of the Sunday edition of the Seattle Times. And that finally convinced DNR to pull this unit from this timber sale. So, and it also, by the way, is what led to this carbon project, which was announced with much fanfare in the Seattle Times a few weeks ago, which some of you may have heard about. This is all a result of this Smuggler timber sale. So you can all thank Samantha Kropp for the carbon project, which never would have happened if it weren't for the fact that Samantha saw that video that I had made at Chameleon and put me in contact with Linda Mapes, who then basically used this threat of a front page article in the Seattle Times to coerce DNR into pulling Unit 1 out of Smuggler and coming up with this idea of, as a sort of a face-saving gesture, of coming up with this carbon project, as they call it. And since I think we're running short on time, I'm gonna skip over this for now to this other map. So that's sort of a history of how we got to where we are today. So we've completed the mapping of all of the legacy forests in Western Washington. We're continuing to fight to try to protect as many of these legacy forests as we can. This is a map that shows where all these legacy forests are located, both those that are currently protected and those that are still unprotected. So the forests that are protected, those legacy forests that are off limits to commercial logging are shown in green. Those that are still unprotected are shown in red. The thing to notice about this slide is that the areas that are protected are heavily concentrated on the west side of the Olympic Mountains, down along the lower Columbia, where the murrelet populations numbers are highest, and in the high Cascades, so in the upper elevations of the Cascade Mountain Range. Virtually nothing, virtually all of the DNR, the older legacy forest in South Central Washington and in the lowland watersheds surrounding Puget Sound are unprotected and available for commercial logging. So those are the forests that we're really fighting to protect, that are really at risk. This is just a summary of how many acres of legacy forests are left and how many are protected, and how many acres in total that DNR manages. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but if there's one number to notice in this chart, it's this number at the bottom in the middle, the 77,341 acres. That's the number of acres we're estimating of legacy forests that are still unprotected in Western Washington. So those, again, are mostly located in South Central Washington and in those lowland watersheds surrounding Puget Sound. How much time do I have left? 15 minutes.
Yeah, I was going to give you a little time check there, Stephen, but 15 minutes if also time for questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So really quickly, there are two general strategies. Well, more than 2 or 3 general strategies we're using to try to work to protect these older forests. One that we're particularly optimistic about is working with the counties. The counties are DNR's biggest client. So the largest share of the money that's generated from the sale of the timber on these state forest lands that DNR manages goes to the schools, the public schools, and to the counties. The state superintendent of public instruction has said that the money that's received by the public schools is an almost invisible share of their total annual budget. Those are his words, almost invisible share. So he's not a big advocate out there advocating for these dollars that are coming in from the sale of these legacy forests. It's really the counties that are out there, the loudest voice, and DNR's most vocal client. And what this chart is showing is the amount of revenue that the counties get from the sale of timber on state forest lands, which is a subcategory of state trust lands. So state forest lands are lands, purchase lands and transfer lands that are managed primarily on behalf of the counties. And they make up about a little over 1/3 of all lands of the 1.6 million acres of forest lands that are managed by DNR in Western Washington are managed primarily to generate revenue for the counties. The counties get about a third of the money that's generated from the sale of timber on those approximately 640,000 acres of forest land. I want to encourage everyone to thank these two commissioners, Thurston County commissioners, because they have been tremendously generous in their leadership and their support for protection of legacy forests in Thurston County. And they are one of the reasons that we're optimistic about our chances of protecting some of these legacy forests in some counties, like Thurston counties, where we've been able to develop working relationships with sympathetic county commissioners and county council members. As I said, the counties are DNR's most vocal client. DNR listens to the counties, and if the counties are telling DNR that they want these forests protected, that they'd rather see these forests, these older forests, these legacy forests conserved for recreation, for carbon storage, for wildlife habitat, than clear cut to generate revenue for the county, DNR should listen because the county, they're managing these lands on behalf of the counties. This goes into more detail about some of the lands that we're working with these Thurston County commissioners to try to protect. This just shows the lands that within the Thurston County half of Capital State Forest that are managed on behalf of the county, which are the blue and yellow areas. I don't want to, I'm going to skip over some of this because I know we're running out of time. This is to just sort of end on a positive note. I wanted to show some slides of some legacy forests that have not yet been harvested, that are not scheduled for auction this year. That we still have an opportunity to protect, that are located on lands that are managed on behalf of Thurston County by DNR. So these are lands, these are great examples of legacy forests that we are working with the Thurston County commissioners to try to find a way to protect. But again, they're at risk and time is not on our side. DNR is actively planning timber sales, not this year, but within the next 5 to 7 years in many of these legacy forests. So this is an example of one of them, Sparrowhawk timber sale. I think this one's scheduled for auction, I believe, in 2024. Another one, Carrot timber sale. Some of the biggest trees that that I've seen in Capital State Forest outside of the Smuggler and Chameleon timber sales. Another example of a legacy forest where they're planning a timber sale is Evergreen Gold timber sale. This one is really interesting in that it contains this stand of culturally modified trees, which can be very important to the Indian tribes. Right in the middle of this timber sale. This timber sale, the Ghost timber sale, happens to have this really beautiful little biking trail running through it. And a couple more examples. So I think I'll end it there and just open it up to see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, people can ask questions. Of course, I just want to call attention to one that's in the chat right now from Karen. So besides the small Tahuya legacy forest, are there any other legacy forests located in Mason County?
I'll have to get back to you on that. I believe, yeah, not very many. There may be a couple little, there are probably a couple little patches of 10, 15, 20 acre patches of legacy forests in Mason County here and there. But they're probably very isolated, little small patches of remnant patches of older trees that got left behind, you know, as parts of, because they were difficult to get to, or because they were, you know, next to wetlands, or connected to, you know, riparian buffers, or in between streams, or there's lots of reasons why they left these little, you know, remnants behind. But there's not much in Mason County.
Thank you, Stephen. And then here's another question from chat. If the need, from Liz, if the need is for the sale is not there as expressed by a county commissioner and the superintendent, why would DNR proceed with the sale?
Well, so DNR, there's a number of different ways I could answer that question. DNR plans timber sales out 5 to 10 years in advance. It takes them about 2 years to after, so they begin by just marking areas where they, you know, they're given these quotas, these targets that the region offices are, so that there's Western Washington is divided into, I think it's 4 regions: Olympic, South, North, Pacific. I think it's 4 regions. So the region offices are the ones that develop these timber sales, that decide which timber sales will be put up for auction in which year. And they're basically trying to meet these volume targets that are handed to them by the state office, by the people who set their sustainable harvest targets for each year. And so they do that on basically on 5 to 10 year intervals, and then every 2 years they'll sort of fine tune that list, or more fully vet that list of timber sales for that 2 year window, and actually go out and begin marking those timber sales. So it takes them about 2 years to go out and survey and appraise and inventory a timber sale and prepare it for auction. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to get a timber sale ready for auction. So it's not easy for DNR to just cancel a timber sale. I mean, it is and it isn't. You know, the lands commissioner has full authority to do it. She can do whatever she wants, really. There's no requirement to sell any particular stand of timber. So she can cancel any of these timber sales. She has a full authority to do that. But if they cancel a timber sale that's scheduled for auction this year, then they're losing money because they've got a certain amount of money that's sunk. They've got sunk costs that they're going to lose, that a certain amount of money they've invested in that timber sale. I mean, there are other, I guess, there are other ways of answering that question. I'm not quite sure. There's another question might be, well, why are they targeting these older forests in the first place, right? And that's a very valid question. I mean, as you could see from the maps that I was showing earlier, these older legacy forests make up a very small percentage of the overall land base that DNR manages. The vast majority of the forests that DNR manages are plantation forests. They're forests that were cut after World War II and replanted. So these are not naturally regenerated forests. And many of these forests are mature, are available for harvest, are ready to harvest. They're marketable. It's marketable timber, and they're not harvesting it because there's a demand for these older trees. They're valuable. These big older trees they bring in a lot of money, and they're easy to. These older stands hold a lot more volume than the younger stands do. So you can go out, a forester can go out and survey, 80 acres of legacy forest and, generate twice as many board feet as he would surveying 80 acres of plantation forest potentially. So with half amount of the work, he accomplishes the same thing, right? Generates the same amount of volume, or twice the amount of volume for the same work, right? Depending on how you look at it. So there's there's several factors motivating them to go out and focus on harvesting these older forests first, and then and then there's also just this sort of old school mentality, I think, that's in play, where a lot of these foresters that are working for DNR have been there a long time. They're used to doing things a certain way. They were educated to trained to believe that the way to manage these forests is to get rid of all of the old, dying, decadent trees, and the way to maximize the net present value of the land and generate the most value for your client, for your employer, for whoever it is who's driving value from the timber, is to cut down the older forests and replace them with a new productive stand of young plantation seedlings, fast growing Douglas fir, primarily Douglas fir cultivars. And that's what they were taught in school, right? And it doesn't matter that everything about that traditional model of forestry has been disproven. I think I'm sure that there are certain foresters within DNR that continue to cling to that model and believe, and I know there are because I've talked to some of them, that continue to believe that they're doing the right thing by cutting down these older forests and replacing them with new productive plantations of nursery grown Douglas fir cultivars, seedlings.
Right, we're up against our 1:30 time. So I have a couple of suggestions. Thank you so much for sharing your information. Obviously, it is a passion for you. And we all know what a passion it is for Sherry. So she is on the board of the same organization. If any of you have further questions, I know you can send them to Sherry. And if she needs to, she'll forward them to Stephen. We have the links available if you would like that and to go and learn more about the organization. I would encourage you to do so. If your passion has been stirred a little bit about old trees, you'll notice at the bottom of your agenda this month, I put a quote from Robert Kennedy about change and how difficult change is. And I think Stephen just spoke to that. People who in good faith have learned it one way, and making a change is really hard. And we're seeing that in so many places. So I appreciate, Sherry, you getting us in touch with Stephen. Stephen, I appreciate so much you sharing your time with us. And I thank all of you for coming. I am going to stop the recording and see what I can do with that. As you can tell, Zoom is not my thing, but I will get the recording out. And Linda Stefan was here, our ace minutes taker, and we will get minutes out to people as well. So unless there is any other business, Amy has her, oh, she has an applaud, not a hand up, right? Okay. If there's anything else from any of you, I would entertain it now. Otherwise, we will leave the meeting. Lots of applause. Okay. And Marty, I want to thank you for helping me through this. That was very gracious of you to do that.